That's where Savannah then got in touch, and when we had a few conversations about different aspects to this, and she was telling me about some of the work that she was doing at the innovation unit. So I will hand over to Savannah to take us through Think It Forward and the work she's been doing.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I'm glad you talked about Australia just then, because that's one of two places my research is based. So, just to give a really quick introduction, I work at Innovation Unit. I'm a senior innovation consultant and service designer there. But I'm actually not going to talk about my work at IU. I'll leave that to my colleague Sophie, who's coming on next. I'm going to talk today about a separate piece of research funded by the Churchill Fellowship and ongoing kind of advocacy that I do around kind of reimagining how we live together. So, in housing adaptations, we spend a huge amount of time, funding, energy, asking how to make homes physically safer, whether it's grab rails, stair lifts, wet rooms. But today, I want to ask a slightly different question, which is who, not just what, helps you live your life. Modern society teaches us to value above all this idea of absolute independence, but as we age or navigate living with a disability, extreme self reliance can become a kind of form of vulnerability. Physical safety is obviously essential, but I'm here to argue that social connection is also a critical component to health, to prevention, and today, I want to explore how our homes can be adapted not just for physical safety, but for social connection. So, I'll start with a person. This is Daryl. He was previously a successful mortgage lender living in California, and he had a range of health crises which changed everything about his life, diabetes, stage 3 cancer, other things that essentially meant he had to relearn how to walk, talk, write, and swallow. And these health issues also triggered financial challenges, and he ended up spending over a decade unhoused. His life changing moment was moving into a place called Goodness Village, which is an affordable tiny homes village. So each resident has what's called a tiny home. You can see one behind that kind of has a kitchen, bathroom, that kind of thing in it as well. And there's also in the village wraparound support. So there's permanent staff, such as rotating. So there's permanent staff who live there, but then there's rotating staff, such as nurses. There's volunteers. But really, the core part of the intervention is community. Villagers cook for one another, they walk pets, they share grocery runs, they even contribute via paid roles, such as security. Goodness Village, at its core, is building a culture of trust and mutual caretaking. And the community is just central to residents' health and recovery. One staff member said to me that if it wasn't for the central community aspect, the neighbourly aspect, that maybe only an eighth of their villagers would still be there. So, yes, the health support that Daryl has received was critical to his recovery and moving on to a new stage of life, but so too was the social side. And the social side came about through really intentional design of the housing and the neighbourhood. To understand how we can build this kind of infrastructure, I have visited 54 intergenerational community orientated housing models across the United States and Australia. My scope is really broad. It included co-housing, which many of you have probably heard of, cooperatives, eco-villages, home sharing models, supported independent social housing, the tiny home village I just mentioned. The models that I visited varied enormously in scale. The smallest was 8 people, the biggest was around 300, varied enormously in terms of governance, most self-managed, some had staff, and affordability was a huge variant as well. They're all independent living, but they all shared something important, which is that they were designed for relationships and they were designed for a range of people to thrive and live connected lives. Intergenerational communal housing is an opportunity that I feel sits at the heart of the core challenges that we're facing as a society around the loneliness epidemic, our strained health, social care, mental health services, aging population, housing insecurity, land and resource management. These challenges are not disconnected from one another. They make up together a fundamental breakdown in how we are living together. So my research culminated in this: Beyond the White Picket Fence, a companion for intergenerational communal housing. It's available online for free at thinkitforward.net, or you can purchase a physical copy. It is about 187 pages, so there's a lot in there, but lots of pictures, and it includes kind of frameworks on conflict. I found that seemingly all the causes of conflict were similar across different size communities, and they all begin with P. Um, Information on how different communities set up governance, on how they manage conflict, and 10 opportunity areas for the UK. One thing that was really clear to me is the benefits for communal living are incredibly far reaching. In many of these communities, care is not privatized to a single household, it's shared across a network of people. Parents often talk about the benefits being living in a kind of village like support system where childcare is less isolating, more affordable. Older adults talked a lot about security to age in place, surrounded by people who know them and people who notice when they're not around. Younger residents talked about gaining access to mentorship, to skills, informal support, and children grow up seeing many different adults as part of their world, which I think is very important. But something that I'm particularly interested in is that the benefits do not stay within the community. They ripple out to neighborhood, to society. Communal living models are often stereotyped as being insular bubbles, but actually, from what I saw, they're generally catalysts for social change. Residents are organising local projects, they're stewarding shared gardens, they're creating spaces which have often been lost from community, doing loads of informal care, which can reduce pressure on public services. They're sharing resources, helping people step lighter on the planet. The housing models are not just new places to live, they go much beyond that. They build this kind of social infrastructure, they build collective resilience and well-being. I'm going to give a few quotes. This is one from someone who lived in an urban eco-village in Los Angeles that's affordable and really, really diverse in terms of age, class, household composition, etc. They said, life past 60 can be tough. You feel alienated, cut off from your livelihood and community. Living alone can be horrifying, but not here. I got a new lease of life when I thought I was heading into isolation. This one is actually from a LGBTQ specific community for young people and for seniors, with kind of integrated housing and support programs. Seniors are so deeply connected to each other and community. It's such a joy to watch. So much camaraderie and support, especially the ones in stable housing. People can't wait to see their friends and have lunch with everyone. Mostly they have come from oppressive and unwelcoming spaces. Finally, it's magical. You see a 3-year-old and a 90-year-old just click and know they'll be friends. All levels of engagement are important. Sometimes it's as simple as a conversation about teeth and dentures. It teaches putting yourself in others' shoes. This one was a little bit of a different place. This was actually a retirement home with intergenerational programming kind of built into the design, but they are now building an intergenerational housing complex. I just wanted to make this really clear. I wrote this recently for a piece to Housing Lynn, and that these are not assisted living or medical facilities. They're intentional, relationship-centered housing models that encourage natural social interactions. People care about each other, not for each other. One thing that I became really interested in my visits was the small everyday practices that make these communities so different to, say, a housing block where people live in proximity but not intentionality. And I start to call these neighborisms. Neighbourisms are the informal habits of care, of support, of interest that strengthen community bonds. It might be someone noticing your light's not been turned on, a meal train organised when you're sick, kids moving freely between homes, someone fixing a bike or helping with a technical issue, a ride to the hospital. These things are not things that are written into policy, but they matter enormously. Not only do neighbourisms give this kind of sense that you're not facing life alone, but they're the bedrock of a resilient society. They create that prevention, that social safety net. So, therefore, they are a core pillar of health and care. I'm going to show you a few different examples now, a few different case studies, so you can kind of get an idea of the broad range of out of the 54. So, one is Santa Rosa Creek Commons. It's an urban intentional community with around 30 residents, ranging from infants to 80 plus. It's a limited equity co-op, so all shareholders collectively own the community and all residents, keeping rates about half of market rate. But the real value here is the kind of what we can call today, if we want to, the social adaptation. When a resident there, for example, needed chemotherapy, the community just rallied and they provided a total of 63 chemo car lifts. One resident put it very simply. They said that, here, I know if I need something, people are there. A really different, interesting example in Colorado is Wild Sage and Silver Sage. They're two co-housing communities which are adjacent. So one is senior specific and one is intergenerational. 40% of the units are in both are classed as affordable. And Silver Sage, the one for older residents, has embedded social processes such as a buddy system for mutual aid, daily check-ins. So if health starts to decline, the community does step up. It's not an assisted living facility, but the social fabric does prevent many residents from having to move into one when they otherwise would have. In Adelaide, there's Christie Walk, which describes itself as an eco-city development. There's about 45 residents, and it's famous for its biodiversity, even though it's very urban. But the real success here is how residents kind of live out their lives together. They talked about how they were focusing on the ecological sustainability side at the beginning, and it's ended up being the social side that is the most important. The social fabric is strengthened through various events they have, dinners, what they call working bees. They also are really dedicated to education. They have about 1,000 visitors a year. And many residents here have lived out their full lives in Christie Walk. There's a palpable kind of commitment to care that I really felt when I was there. And someone said that across the board, this care, it's a neighbourly interest in each other. It's not intrusive. So those are some examples. Across all of the communities I visited, I saw some common building blocks. People ask, what makes these places work? So I've kind of summarized it into these building blocks. And the first along the bottom there is, of course, resource security and sustainable policy foundations, which is no easy feat. It's very tough, and it's what I'm doing a lot of advocacy around at the moment through parliamentary routes and other routes. And there's details in my output on what the UK can do to make this easier. The next layer, which will be very interesting and kind of which this audience will have thought a lot about, is the physical foundation. Homes are private, but there's shared spaces, whether it's gardens, dining rooms, workshops, which intentionally encourage natural encounters. Spaces that are shared are multi-purpose, they're transition friendly, they're age friendly, they consider children, changing families. When we think about adaptations, thinking beyond kind of grab rails and wheelchair friendly spaces, which are really important, it's also really important to adapt physical spaces to support intergenerational activity connection, which directly increases well-being. The next building block is social infrastructure. So successful communities invest proactively in the processes that help people live together well. So this could be community agreements, transparent communication, shared rhythms, communal meals and work days, things that dissolve tension. before it grows into something else, and helps people build relationships with a really low bar for socializing. And finally, belonging and purpose. Communities thrive when residents feel they matter and there's a long-term commitment to the space. This happens when the skills, knowledge, and shared experiences of elders are actively valued and integrated into daily life. So, whenever I talk about these communities, people always say things like, "Isn't this really niche? Isn't it really expensive?" And the truth is that there is a huge spectrum of models. Some owner occupied co housing can be expensive. Many places on purpose that I went to visit were designed to be highly affordable and accessible. There's not one right or wrong way to design for communal living, whether it's kind of retrofit or new. Much depends on geography, on context, on preference. But it is my opinion that we need to rethink the primacy of nuclear family home ownership, which, as we know, often ends up with single owner occupancy, as the only valid aspiration. For older adults, for disabled people, relying solely on physical adaptations within an isolated home is not enough. We need housing models that offer built in social adaptations. Um, so, society is grappling with loneliness, housing shortages, strained public services, and I think these models offer a glimpse of another way. I don't have time right now to go into the kind of recommendations for how, but I think today we can just start with saying that it's important to design for connection and support this in the same way we support designing for sustainability. Invest in social, not just physical infrastructure and impact, learning about what that actually means and the impact it has, and incentivize instead of disincentivizing a range of alternative living arrangements. I'm just going to end now with this final quote from a man in his 60s who spent years in solitary confinement in prison. He didn't come out looking for community, but he found it, and he now lives in an urban gift economy eco village near Oakland. And he takes part in community dinners, and he has a huge smile on his face all the time. And that I was there. He said, "This community has been a lifeline. If someone hasn't experienced living like this, they've missed out." When we adapt and design housing with relationships in mind, we don't just change where people live, we're changing how people live. If loneliness is a health crisis, which it is, then I think designing intentionally for social connection should be an urgent cure to that. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Savannah. So I suppose it's coincidental that it's Global Intergenerational Week this week. I mean, if we'd known that, we probably would have picked today anyway. But quite a coincidence that it is Global Intergenerational Week this week. In terms of kind of public policy in the UK, and as kind of said at the start, quite a lot of it tends to focus on specialist housing for old people and kind of moving them out of their existing homes and existing communities, in the thought that if you gather all older people in one place, then you kind of solve the loneliness and social connection issue. What's your kind of thoughts after kind of looking at these different communities where there is that kind of more intergenerational aspect? And are we kind of missing a trick if we do kind of focus on retirement communities without that kind of more intergenerational approach?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely not for me to say what people's preferences are. And as the wild and silver sage example shows, because lots of people have moved from wild sage to silver sage because finding that kind of time difference, noise preferences, whatever it might be, weren't working out for them into the intergenerational one. So they moved and they're right opposite, and now they have that intergenerational programming and daily connection. I think so. You know, different people have different preferences, and some people may want to be living in a space with people their own age, which is fine. I think what I'm arguing for is that not being the default. I don't think that splitting housing, social programs, whatever it is by age, by default, makes sense when at different points in our life, we have different amounts of energy to give, we have different time, we have different finances, we have different priorities. And as soon as you put people from different generations into a space, they can share these really naturally. And I saw that all the time. I saw there was a young guy who was spending a lot of time with an older resident, getting a lot of kind of academic support and in exchange giving a lot of technical support. That's just a small example, but as soon as we split people by one family or by age groups, you lose that kind of mutual opportunity for sharing, for knowledge gain, and for collective resilience. So I think the more that we can have that by default, the better, and the more that we kind of can benefit from one another and create that collective resilience.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Natalie in the comments is asking about a place in the UK that have done this successfully, which is where we're going to next. But there's this book that I found as well that we can, at the same time as we're kind of talking about this, about architecture of aging in place, and that's got a number of examples from around the world as well of what they term naturally occurring retirement communities, or NORCs, which I don't think is the best acronym, but that there are quite a few examples on there from across the world where people have taken this, I suppose, kind of zoomed out, more joined up approach to how this how we can do things a little bit differently. I think it also goes back to that universal design thing about having homes that anybody can live in kind of throughout their life, rather than just building them for when we're kind of fit and active.